Tuya. Tuya. Tabanbij. Transcript Gama. Sabij. Badia. Biaj Udij. Via doing Tukwada. Tabanbij. Taban Tama. I need to correct something before I begin. Let me look at the names to avoid. The band names are Marcus, Diane, Tyler, Harold, Nathan, Colleen, Sandra, Ryan, Delee, Kevin, Sandra, Ryan, Tali, Kevin, Lily, Keviner. New names I'll use: Arthur, narrator 67, Connor, son, Jade, daughter-in-law, Brenda, late wife, Felix, attorney, Watts, PI. I was wrong. For 40 years, I told myself that being a good father meant saying yes. Yes to the car when he turned 16. Yes to the car when he turned 16. Yes to the college tuition. Yes to the down payment on his first apartment. Yes to the business loans that were never paid back and never mentioned again. I told myself it was love. It wasn't. It was cowardice dressed up in a checkbook. I know that now. I know it because my son Connor proved it to me in the most expensive lesson of my life. My name is Arthur Calloway. I am 67 years old, and I spent the better part of 3 decades building a medical supply distribution company out of a rented warehouse in Columbus, Ohio, with nothing but a used delivery truck, a phone book, and the stubbornness God apparently hardwires into men born in the Rust Belt. My late wife Brenda used to say I would argue with a parking meter and somehow win. She wasn't wrong. I negotiated my first hospital contract in a suit I bought at Goodwill with a coffee stain on the left lapel. The hospital's purchasing manager didn't notice, or if he did, he respected the audacity enough not to say anything. We shook hands. I drove home, parked in the driveway, and sat in the truck for 20 minutes because I was shaking too hard to walk inside. That is the kind of man I was, a man who earned every single thing. Connor did not inherit that quality. He inherited my chin, my height, my dark eyes that Brenda always said could convince anyone of anything. But somewhere between the private school tuition and the unfailing safety net of my bank account, he lost the part of himself that understood the weight of things, the weight of money, of effort, of loyalty. He grew up understanding only one principle. If he needed something, I would provide it. For 26 years, that arrangement suited us both. I loved being needed. He loved being comfortable. It was a quiet, mutually agreed upon fiction. Then he met Jade Whitmore, and the fiction became a fraud. I found out about the engagement the same way you find out about most things these days. Not from a phone call, not from a visit, not from a conversation over dinner. I found out through a notification on my phone. Connor had posted it on Instagram. A photo of the two of them on a rooftop in Nashville. Jade's hand extended toward the camera, a diamond ring catching the sunset light. The caption said, "She said yes, life is perfect." I liked the photo. That is what you do. I liked the photo, and I sat in my kitchen in Columbus and I waited for the call. The call came 3 days later, not from Connor, from Jade. She had a voice like a well-practiced presentation, smooth and upbeat with just enough warmth to feel personal. She thanked me for being so supportive of their relationship. She told me how excited she was to be joining the family. Then, without pausing for breath, she told me they had already started planning the wedding. In Sedona, she said, we found this incredible venue, cliffside resort overlooking the Red Rocks. It can hold 250 guests. It is the most breathtaking backdrop you have ever seen. She paused then, a single deliberate pause. The package for our date is $440,000. But Connor says you will want to take care of it. He says his dad always comes through. I remember I set my coffee mug down on the counter very carefully, the way you set something down when you are trying not to throw it. He says his dad always comes through. I told Jade I would need to think about it. She laughed and said, "Of course, take your time, but the venue needs a deposit by Friday to hold the date." It was Tuesday. I called Connor immediately. He picked up on the first ring, which told me Jade had already briefed him on the conversation and he was waiting. "Hey, Dad." His voice was easy, casual, the voice of someone who believes the outcome of the conversation has already been decided. $440,000, I said. He laughed. It is Sedona, Dad. Everything out there is expensive. You should see this place. It is absolutely unreal. Jade has been planning this vision her whole life. There is this terrace that looks out over Cathedral Rock. The photos are going to be incredible. Photos. I noticed he said photos, not memories, not moments. Connor, I said slowly, are you inviting me? To the wedding? The pause on his end lasted exactly long enough to tell me everything. He cleared his throat. We're working through the guest list, he said. It is a really specific vibe we are going for. Jade has a very curated aesthetic, and she wants the energy of the day to feel cohesive. You know how it is. I did not know how it was. I had been married in a church in Dayton, Ohio, in front of 60 people who mostly worked at the sheet metal factory where Brenda's father spent 30 years. The vibe had been joyful. The energy had been real. So you might not invite me, I said. But you want me to pay. It is not that simple, Dad. He had the nerve to sound marvelly exasperated, as though I were the one being unreasonable. You would be contributing to the celebration, to our future, to making Jade feel like this family welcomes her and supports her and believes in this marriage. I sat with that for a moment. Contribute, I said. Right. He exhaled. And honestly, the venue coordinator said they need a deposit in the next couple of days. $50,000 to hold the date. We can figure out the rest of the breakdown later. I heard background noise behind him. The clinking of ice in a glass. Music. A woman's laughter, low and satisfied. I will think about it, I said. Dad. His voice sharpened slightly, just enough. Don't overthink this. It is not a big deal. You have the money. This is what families do. I hung up. I walked to the window of my study. I looked out at the backyard where there was an oak tree Brenda and I planted when Connor was born. It was enormous now, its canopy spreading wide enough to shade half the lawn. I had been watching that tree for 26 years, and I had never once questioned whether it was worth the water. I was questioning it now. The envelope arrived on Thursday morning, not a card, not a wedding invitation, an envelope from a business called Elevation Events, a Scottsdale planning company with a logo that looked like it cost more than my first delivery truck. Inside was a document, 15 pages, bound with a paperclip. It was a line-item breakdown of the wedding budget, each expense detailed, categorized, and totaled at the bottom in a number so large it had commas in 2 places. At the top, in the client information field, my name had been typed. Arthur Calloway, responsible party. I put on my reading glasses. I began to read. Venue rental, Cliffside Grand Terrace, Sedona, $95,000. Catering package, 250 guests. 4-course dinner, $62,000. Custom bridal gown, designer attire in New York, $18,000. Wedding photographer and videographer, luxury editorial package, $22,000. Hair and makeup team, destination travel included, $8,500. Live band and DJ package, $14,000. Floral arrangements, custom desert bloom installation, $19,000. First-class round-trip flights, Maldives honeymoon, $28,000. Private villa rental, Maldives, 14 nights, $47,000. Wedding planner fees, $35,000. And then, at the bottom of the document, a line item that made the reading glasses feel insufficient. As though I needed something stronger, a telescope, maybe, to properly comprehend the distance between this number and anything resembling reality. Guest courtesy allocation. Immediate family non-attendance waiver, $75,000. I read it 3 times. The number did not change. Guest courtesy allocation. Non-attendance waiver. They were charging me $75,000 for the privilege of not being there. I set the document on the desk. I walked to the kitchen and poured a glass of water. I drank the entire glass standing at the sink, looking at nothing. Then I walked back to the desk and read the line again. It was still there. There was a handwritten note attached to the final page. Connor's handwriting, which I recognized from 26 years of birthday cards and report cards, and the occasional apology letter that had always managed to end with a request. Dad, Jade and I want this day to be exactly what she has always envisioned. We know your style is more traditional, and we think you would be more comfortable watching the professional video afterward than sitting through something that might feel a bit foreign to you. This is not about not loving you. It is about loving Jade enough to give her the day she deserves. The non-attendance waiver covers the coordinator's additional planning costs for managing the family communication and expectations around your absence. It is standard. Please wire the first installment to the account listed on page 14 by end of week. Standard. I picked up the phone. I called Felix Archer. He had been my attorney since the early days of the company, a lean, quiet man from Cincinnati who wore bow ties and had never once raised his voice in a deposition because he had never needed to. "Felix," I said when he answered. "Clear your afternoon." When I walked into Felix's office that evening, I handed him the 15-page document without a word. He read it cover to cover. He set it down. He looked at me over the rim of his reading glasses. "The non-attendance waiver," he said. "Yes. They charged you to not show up at your own son's wedding." "Yes." He folded his hands on the desk. "Arthur, before we talk about what we can do, I need to ask you something. Is there any part of you that wants to simply pay this and maintain the relationship?" I looked out his window at the Columbus skyline. I had helped build 4 of the buildings I could see from that window, medical supply contracts with the hospital systems that anchored the financial health of this city. I had shaken hands in every conference room up there. I said, "Felix, I want you to pull the company agreement, the one where Connor is listed as a junior partner, and I want you to tell me every single asset he has access to through the business." Felix nodded once. He understood the assignment. He also referred me to an investigator named Watts. That was all anyone called him, Watts. Like a unit of power, which as it turned out was appropriate. Watts arrived at Felix's office the following morning. He was a compact man, maybe 55, with the quiet patience of someone who had spent decades watching people and waiting for them to make mistakes. He sat down, put a manila folder on the table, and looked at me. "I have been looking into Jade Whitmore since you called yesterday," he said. "You want me to start with the finances or the background?" "Start with what I need to know most," I said. He opened the folder. "Jade Whitmore has been in 3 prior relationships that followed the same pattern. Meet a man with assets. Accelerate the relationship. Leverage the wedding as a financial event. In 2 of the 3 cases, the man paid significant sums before the relationship dissolved. In one case, the dissolution happened before the wedding. In another, 6 weeks after. In both cases, Jade left with considerably more than she arrived with." I looked at the photographs clipped to the top of the folder. Jade in Nashville with Connor. Jade at some rooftop event before Connor. Jade at what appeared to be a charity gala with a man I didn't recognize, both of them laughing at something off camera. "She does this," I said. "It was not a question. She is very good at it," Watts said. He turned a page. "Her credit score is in the low 5s. She has 2 civil judgments against her from a former landlord in Phoenix and a car lease company in Denver. She owes approximately $90,000 across 6 accounts. Her influencer business, which she presents as her primary income, generated just under $12,000 in actual verified revenue last year." $12,000, I said. "She fabricates the rest," Watts said. "Sponsors that aren't real. Partnerships that are stage. She bought 70% of her followers. Her engagement rate is a fraction of what she claims to brands. If anyone looked carefully, the whole thing would collapse in about 48 hours. I thought about the rooftop photo Connor had posted. She said yes. Life is perfect. Life, I thought, was anything but. "Does my son know any of this?" I asked. Watts paused. Then he said, "Some. He knows she has debt. She has framed it to him as being unfairly targeted by vindictive exes and bad luck. He believes her because believing her is easier than the alternative." I asked Watts to continue gathering information. I asked him specifically to monitor her conversations and her financial activity. He told me he would have more within 72 hours. What he brought back changed everything and nothing at the same time. It confirmed what I already knew somewhere in the part of myself that I had been trying to quiet for the past week. He played me the recording in Felix's conference room. The audio was clean. Jade's voice was so clear, she might as well have been sitting across the table from me. She was at a wine bar in Scottsdale with a woman named Piper, someone who worked in influencer brand management. They had apparently been friends for years. The recording was 42 minutes long. Watts had marked the relevant section. He pressed play. "The dad is the whole play," Jade's voice said. Her tone was not the warm, polished tone she used with me on the phone. It was flat, efficient, the voice of someone discussing logistics. "Connor is sweet, and he genuinely thinks this is love, and I am not saying it isn't. But the structure of this only works if the dad stays in the picture long enough to fund the setup and then stays out of the picture permanently." Piper said something I couldn't make out. "He's old," Jade said. "He's got high blood pressure." Connor mentioned it once. "I'm not saying anything is going to happen. I'm just saying the timeline on this is favorable. We do the wedding, we establish ourselves, and then we start the conversation about estate planning. Connor needs to be the executor. That's the whole point. Once that's in place, the rest takes care of itself." I heard Piper's voice more clearly this time. "What about the dad wanting to come?" Jade laughed. It was a clean, practiced sound. "That's why the waiver fee exists. He'll either pay it and feel like he contributed, or he'll refuse to pay it, and Connor can tell him they're heartbroken and cut him off. Either way, the money transfers or the relationship ends, and honestly, either outcome works for us. We just need the initial wire to clear so the venue is locked. After that, everything else follows." What stopped the recording? I sat very still for a moment. She had mapped it out. Every step. The waiver fee wasn't a coordinator's cost. It was a test. If I paid it, I confirmed I was manageable. If I refused and pushed back, they would weaponize my refusal and use it to cut me off, while positioning themselves as the wounded parties. Either way works for us. I looked at Felix. Felix looked at me. "We have the morality clause in the junior partnership agreement," Felix said. "Connor signed it when he joined the company 3 years ago. Conduct that constitutes fraud or conspiracy is grounds for immediate removal." "And the company vehicle?" I said. "The Audi." Felix pulled up a document on his tablet. "Leased through Callaway Medical Supply for business purposes. Per the GPS records from the fleet management system, it has not been used for a business call in 4 months. In the past 4 months, it has been driven to Scottsdale 6 times, Nashville twice, and what appears to be a wedding venue in Sedona on 3 occasions. That is personal use of a company asset," I said. "Billed against company accounts," Felix confirmed. I sat back. The decision I had been circling for 10 days settled into place. Clean and final. Like a key turning in a lock. "I am going to call Connor," I said. "I'm going to tell him I am wiring the money." Felix looked at me carefully. "I am not actually going to wire the money," I continued. "I am going to set up a verification protocol with the bank. Nothing processes without a second authorization from me. I want them to believe it is done. I want them to feel safe. I want them to relax all the way through the ceremony." Felix said. "And then?" "And then I want the hammer to fall when the champagne is already poured." I called Connor that evening. I made my voice sound tired and soft, the voice of a man who has worn himself out fighting and finally surrendered. I told him I had thought about it. I told him I had understood how important this day was to Jade and by extension to him. I told him I had set up the transfer. The relief in his voice was immediate and naked. It was the relief of someone who had been holding tension they thought they were hiding. "Thanks, Dad," he said. "I knew you'd come through. I told Jade you would." "Of course you did," I thought. He said, "And look, I know the non-attendance thing feels weird, but it is really for the best. You can watch the video afterward. The videographer they hired is incredible. You will feel like you were there. I will feel like I was there." I repeated. "Exactly," he said, completely missing it. I told him to have a beautiful wedding. I told him I was proud of him and I hoped he was very happy. I hung up and sat in the dark for a long time. The house was quiet. The way houses get quiet when the person who made them warm is no longer in them. Brenda had been gone for 4 years. I had kept the house because leaving it felt like admitting she was really gone. I had filled it with her photographs and her books, and the handmade quilt she never quite finished, the one that was still draped over the arm of the chair in the corner of the bedroom. I looked at her photo on the desk. "I'm sorry," I said to the photo. "I should have done this sooner." The wedding was on a Saturday in May. Arizona in May is a particular kind of beautiful that makes you understand why people choose to live in the desert. The sky is a blue so deep it looks invented. The red rock formations around Sedona glow in the morning light, like something geological and sacred. I did not see any of this in person. I was sitting in the kitchen of my house in Columbus, Ohio, in my bathrobe, watching a live stream that Jade had set up for her followers. She had promoted it all week. The big day. Watch us say I do. Link in bio. The view count when I tuned in at 10 in the morning was already past 600,000. The resort was extraordinary. I will grant them that. The terrace was draped in cream and terracotta and desert wildflowers. The views of Cathedral Rock behind the altar were genuinely breathtaking. The chairs were filled with people who looked expensive and photogenic and entirely at ease in their curated surroundings. I watched Jade walk through the bridal suite in her $18,000 gown. She moved the way people move when they know they are being filmed. Slightly elevated, slightly performative. The most cinematic version of themselves. She held a small handheld camera and narrated for her followers, as though she were reporting from a natural disaster. She had organized herself. "You guys," she breathed into the camera, "this is actually happening. Look at this dress. I could cry. I might actually cry. Do not let me actually cry, because I just had my makeup done." The view count crossed 800,000. Connor's video was more subdued. He was in the groom suite with two friends, all of them in light grey suits that matched the desert tones. He looked handsome. He also looked like he had already had 2 drinks, which at 10:30 in the morning, in his father's estimation, was 2 drinks too many. He raised a glass to the camera. "To the luckiest day of my life," he said. He believed that. I could see it in his face. He genuinely believed it. That was the part that made my chest tighten, not with anger, with something older and sadder than anger. He had been maneuvered so thoroughly and so skillfully that he thought he was standing at the center of a love story. He did not know he was standing at the center of a transaction. The ceremony began at 4 in the afternoon. The sun was dropping toward the rocks, painting everything amber and gold. The live stream cameras caught it perfectly. Jade had hired 3 separate camera operators for the ceremony alone. This was not a wedding. It was a production. The officiant was a man in a linen suit who spoke in the measured, slightly theatrical cadence of someone who had done this many times and understood that he was supporting talent rather than headlining. He talked about love. He talked about commitment. He used the word journey 4 times. Connor stood at the altar with his hands clasped, watching Jade walk toward him. Something in his face when he saw her made me feel the specific sorrow of watching someone love the wrong person. Absolutely. He meant it. Whatever else was true, he meant it. They exchanged vows. They exchanged rings. The officiant pronounced them husband and wife. The cameras cut to the crowd. 250 people applauding. The live stream peaked at just over 1,200,000 viewers. I poured myself a cup of coffee and waited. The reception moved indoors to the resort's grand ballroom. The band played. The champagne flowed, or began to flow. Waitstaff moved through the room with trays of appetizers that cost more per piece than most people spend on a full meal. The couple entered to a song I didn't recognize. They danced. People filmed them dancing. And then, quietly, somewhere between the second course and the toast, the machine stopped. I had instructed Felix to have the bank flag the transaction at 6:47 p.m. local time. The venue's payment processor would attempt to run the final authorization at 7. The flag would stop it. Felix would arrive at the resort at 7:15 with 2 colleagues from the district attorney's office who had been briefed on the fraud evidence and the recordings. Watts had already delivered the documentation to the appropriate parties 48 hours prior. I watched the live stream when the music stopped. The band simply paused mid-song, instruments going quiet in an overlapping, dissonant fade. The camera operators kept filming because that is what camera operators do. The resort manager, A woman in a black blazer who moved with the focused efficiency of someone accustomed to managing difficult situations walked to the center of the room. She did not tap a microphone. She did not clear her throat. She spoke at a volume that carried without being a shout. "Mr. Reeves." A pause. "There is a matter that requires your immediate attention." Connor's face on the live stream was visible for a moment before the camera operator panned away. He looked confused. He looked the way people look when something impossible is happening and their mind is still trying to explain it as something ordinary. I watched him cross the room to speak with the manager. I watched the conversation happen, his face shifting through confusion to alarm to something approaching panic. I watched him take out his phone. My phone rang once before I answered. "Dad." His voice was tight, controlled, trying to hold something together that was already falling apart. "There is a problem with the transfer. The bank is saying it didn't go through. There must be something wrong with the account number. Just call them. It will take 5 minutes. "There's no error, Connor," I said. The silence on his end lasted almost 4 seconds. "What?" he said. "The transfer requires a secondary authorization," I explained. "I chose not to provide it." "Dad." His voice dropped lower. "Dad." His voice dropped lower. "Dad, we are in the middle of the reception. 250 people are here. Jade's family flew in from Seattle. We have a band and a dinner service and a bar tab that is already running. And I need you to call the bank right now and fix this." "I am not going to call the bank," I said. I heard his breathing change. "Then what?" he said. "Are you going to do?" "I am going to let Felix handle the next part," I said. "He is in the parking lot." A pause. "Felix. Felix Archer. Why is Felix—" He stopped. "I believe you are about to find out," I said. I hung up. I turned the live stream back on. Felix entered the live stream back on. Felix entered the ballroom at 7:17. He was flanked by 2 people I recognized from his descriptions as investigators from the district attorney's office. He was carrying the blue folder, the one that had 31 pages of documented financial fraud, 2 audio recordings, GPS logs, credit card statements, and a signed affidavit from me as the primary complainant and company owner. He walked to the center of the room with the unhurried confidence of a man who has never once needed to raise his voice to be heard. Connor was already there, having pushed through the crowd when someone told him there were people in suits who had just walked in. "Felix," Connor said. His voice had the high, strained quality of someone who is very afraid but performing very hard. "Whatever this is, we can talk about it Monday. This is not the time." Felix looked at him steadily. "Connor, I am sorry to do this today. I want you to know that this is not how your father wanted this to proceed. He gave you every opportunity to make this right. What are you talking about? What is he talking about?" Jade's voice cut through from behind Connor. She had come to stand beside him, her dress somehow looking less substantial under the ballroom lights, its perfection slightly undone by the tension in her posture. Felix opened the folder. He did not read from it. He spoke from knowledge. "Connor Calloway," he said, "you have been using company-leased vehicles and company expense accounts for personal use for 14 months. The total misappropriation amounts to approximately $168,000. Additionally, the supplementary company card you authorized Jade Whitmore to use has been used for personal purchases totaling approximately $41,000. These are facts. They have been documented, verified, and delivered to the district attorney's office." The room had gone very quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when 250 people all make the same decision to stop breathing for a moment. "Jade." Her voice when she finally spoke was stripped with every layer of warm, polished performance. What she had underneath was cold and sharp. "This is insane. He gave us the card. He authorized it. Connor, tell him." Connor was staring at Felix. He had the look of a man standing at the edge of a height he didn't know he'd been climbing toward. "Dad authorized the card for business use," Connor said, but his voice was already uncertain, already understanding. "Your father authorized a supplementary card for your use as a company employee," Felix said. "He did not authorize it for personal use by a non-employee. That distinction is what the prosecutor's office will focus on. The word prosecutor landed in the room like something physical. I also need to inform you both, Felix continued, that the recordings obtained in the course of this investigation have been provided to the relevant parties, including the conversation at the wine bar in Scottsdale. He looked at Jade directly. Approximately 2 weeks ago, Jade's face went perfectly still. A woman near the back of the room made a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a word that couldn't quite form. Someone else was filming everything, phone raised, the red record dot visible across the ballroom. Jade's eyes went to the phones. All the phones. She had spent her entire career managing the camera. She had built a life on the understanding that she controlled the narrative. And now the narrative was on 100 screens, and she controlled none of them. "Stop filming," she said. Her voice cracked on the second word. "Stop filming me right now. This is private. This is my wedding." Nobody stopped. The resort manager stepped forward. She spoke quietly to Connor. "The remainder of the deposit for this event has not been secured. The balance is due before service can continue. We will need the room vacated within the hour if the payment cannot be processed." Connor turned to look at Jade. She turned to look at him. That was the moment. That specific look between them, unwitnessed by cameras because neither of them was looking at a camera, told the whole story. He saw her clearly for the first time, and she saw that he saw. "Dad," Connor said into the phone when he called me 3 minutes later. His voice was something I had not heard in a very long time. It was the voice of the 12-year-old boy who had called me from a school overnight trip because he was scared and didn't want anyone to know. "I'm here," I said. "Did you know?" he asked. "About her?" "I found out 10 days ago. Why didn't you tell me?" I thought about the right answer. I settled on the true one. "Because you wouldn't have believed me," I said, "and because you needed to see it yourself." He was quiet for a long time. The wedding planner came and went. Felix and the investigators spoke with Jade privately for 20 minutes in the hallway. The guests, to their credit, mostly cleared out with the quiet efficiency of people who understood they were witnessing something private, even if they had all chosen to film it. The band had packed their instruments. The champagne went back into its cases. Connor called me again at 9 that evening. He was in a hotel room. The honeymoon flights were still scheduled, but he had not gone to the airport. "She is not who I thought she was," he said. "I know," I said. "I feel like an idiot." "You're not an idiot. You loved someone. She used it. That is not the same thing." I made him talk for a while, which is not something I am naturally inclined toward. I am a man who would rather solve a problem than discuss it, but Brenda always said that some problems cannot be solved. They can only be witnessed, and the witnessing itself is the thing that heals them. So I listened. I let him be embarrassed and angry and confused and sad, all of it, without rushing toward resolution. But at the end of the conversation, he said, "I need to pay you back. The card charges. The car. All of it." "I know you do," I said. "And you will. But we are going to restructure your relationship with the company first. The junior partnership agreement needs to be revised. You are going to have a salary, a fixed salary, not open access. You are going to have performance metrics and you are going to meet them." He was quiet. "It is not a punishment," I said. "It is the start of you actually working." "Okay," he said after a moment. "Yeah. Okay." I drove to Sedona the following week, not for any particular reason. I had always wanted to see the Red Rocks. Brenda had wanted to go, and we had never made it. I drove my truck out and spent 4 days in the small hotel, and woke up each morning and went for a long walk in the desert, while the sky changed colors over the formations. On the last morning, I sat on a rock at the edge of a trail and looked at Cathedral Rock, which is the formation that had been behind the altar at Connor's wedding. It was extraordinary, not because of the wedding. In spite of it, I thought about what I would do differently if I could do the last 26 years again. The answer, I decided, was very little. I would set limits earlier. I would let him fail at smaller things when the cost of failure was lower. I would have been less afraid of disappointing him and more committed to the harder, slower work of teaching him who he was supposed to become. But I would not undo the love, even the love that was taken advantage of. Because the love was real, and you cannot regret the real things. I drove home through the desert with the windows down and the radio off. The road was wide and the sky was enormous, and I felt, for the first time in a long time, like a man who was exactly where he was supposed to be. Connor called me from a payphone outside the county jail 3 weeks later. The misappropriation charges had been settled without criminal prosecution in exchange for a repayment agreement and his cooperation in the financial audit. Jade's situation was more complicated. She was facing civil fraud proceedings from 2 parties and a separate investigation related to the prior financial pattern Watts had documented. I had no involvement in that. The machine of consequence was handling it without me. He asked if I would pick him up. I drove to Columbus in my truck. I parked in the lot and I waited, the way I used to wait in pickup lines outside his elementary school, the engine running, the radio on something quiet. He came out looking thinner and quieter than I had ever seen him. He got in the passenger side and closed the door and sat there for a moment without speaking. I let him sit. Then he said, "I want to start over." "I know," I said. I started the engine. We drove home the long way. We did not talk about Jade. We did not talk about money. We talked about other things, smaller things, the kind that had been crowded out for years by the ongoing business of managing a financial relationship masquerading as a family one. When I pulled into the driveway, he looked at the house the way you look at something you thought you understood and are now seeing for the first time. "It is a good house," he said. "It is," I agreed. I turned the engine off. "Your mother picked the oak floors. She said they were the only thing worth spending money on, because everything else you could change, but good floors lasted forever." He looked at me. "She was right," I said. "About most things." We got out of the truck. The oak tree in the backyard was doing what it always did, growing slowly and completely and without any interest in whether or not anyone was watching. I had started this whole thing thinking I was dealing with a problem of money. I was wrong. Money was only ever the symptom. The problem was that I had spent 26 years giving my son everything he needed to be comfortable and almost nothing he needed to be good. That was on me as much as it was on him. Maybe more. We were both going to have to do the work now, both of us starting from somewhere closer to the beginning than either of us had expected to be at this point in our lives. That was all right. The work, I had always known, was the only part that was real. If you've ever had to make a hard choice for the sake of someone you love, you know that the hardest choices rarely feel like victories. They feel like necessary losses. But sometimes the thing you're willing to lose turns out not to be gone. Sometimes it was just waiting to become something different. Thank you for listening. Hit like if you believe that accountability is an act of love. Subscribe for more stories from this road. And in the comments, tell me, have you ever had to let someone fall before they could find their way back? I want to hear from you. There is something nobody tells you about raising a child. You pour everything you have into them, your time, your money, your patience, your best years, and somewhere in the middle of all that giving, you forget to teach them the one thing that holds a life together. That consequences are real, that the world is not a soft place, that love without limits is not actually love at all. It is just a long, slow way of building someone who will eventually try to take everything from you. I learned that the hard way with Connor, and I will carry my part of that for the rest of my life. When I look back at what happened, I do not think of Jade as the source of the problem. She was what she was. She moved through the world with a practiced efficiency, reading the room, finding the opening, walking through it. That is its own kind of intelligence, even if I want no part of it. The real question was never about her. It was about the environment she found. She found a young man who had never had to earn anything, who had been cushioned from every consequence, who had learned from his own father that money was how love expressed itself. She did not create that. I did. That is the part that sits with me. Not the anger, not the money, not the $75,000 fee for my own absence. What sits with me is the quieter accounting. Every time I wrote a check instead of having a hard conversation. Every time I cleaned up a mess that should have been his to clean. Every time I chose his comfort over his growth. Each of those moments was a choice, and each one had a consequence that I was too comfortable to see coming. The thing about actions is that they compound. Not immediately, not obviously, but over time they build into something you eventually have to reckon with. Connor's entitlement did not appear overnight. It accumulated across 2.5 decades of being told, through my wallet, that he was exempt, and when Jade arrived and looked at the situation clearly and saw the structural weakness, she did exactly what a person without conscience does when they find a structural weakness. She walked right through it. So I had to reckon with it. We both did. What I want to say, the thing I actually believe, is that intelligence without moral grounding is just a more sophisticated way of getting yourself into trouble. Jade was smart. She was genuinely strategic, but she had built that strategy on the assumption that other people did not have the will to hold the line. She assumed I was too old, too tired, too desperate for connection to do what needed doing. She was wrong about that, but she was right that it had taken me too long to find the line in the first place. Strength is not the absence of love. I used to confuse the two. I thought firmness meant coldness, that holding Connor accountable meant I did not believe in him. The truth is the opposite. The willingness to let someone face the real weight of their choices is one of the only genuine acts of faith you can extend to another person. It says, I believe you are capable of more than this. It says, I am not going to protect you from the person you need to become. Connor and I are not all the way back. I do not know if we will get all the way back. But we are somewhere new, somewhere that feels more honest than anything we built before. He works. He earns. He handles his own mistakes now, and I let him. That is the trade I made. And some mornings, driving that truck down an empty highway with the windows down, I think it might be the best investment I ever made.